In the 13th year of the Jian era, Liu Bei passed away. This man, riding alone, established his dominance in Jingzhou over the regions of Jianghan. A regional warlord who controlled a certain territory. Completed his life journey. His death ignited the ambitions of various forces. Cao Cao's mighty army and Sun Quan envoys had arrived. Once again, Jingzhou became a battlefield where heroes contended. Under Liu Bei rule, Jingzhou was a peaceful land in turbulent times. The common people and gentry vied to pledge their allegiance. However, there was a man who didn't find happiness here. He spent a full 7 years in Jingzhou. These 7 years were devoid of battles and conflicts. For ordinary people, it was a time of contentment and happiness. But he was melancholic and unhappy. He once burst into tears in front of Liu Bei, simply because he hadn't ridden a horse for a long time. Fat had accumulated on his thighs. The greatest sorrow of this man in his 40s was. The days and months passed slowly, and old age approached, yet his achievements were nowhere to be seen. He yearned for the restoration of the Han dynasty. But he helplessly wasted his years in Jingzhou. When Liu Bei passed away, he was stationed in Fancheng, oblivious to Cao Cao's mighty army approaching. Nor did he know that he had become an excellent example in the words of Fu Xun. Do you think you can surpass Liu Bei? Fu Xun asked. Liu Cong, the son of the recently deceased Liu Bei and the new ruler, honestly replied, I cannot compare to Liu Bei. Well then, Fu Xun analyzed. If Liu Bei cannot defeat Cao Cao, why would you still fight? We should surrender. Liu Cong was persuaded. He handed over the Jingzhou that his father had painstakingly managed for 8 years, and handed it over to Cao Cao. When the news reached Liu Bei, he must have felt like swearing. He had been guarding the northern gate of Jingzhou diligently, but now he found himself trapped in the heart of enemy territory. In theory, he should surrender. But his pride, his feud with Cao Cao, made it impossible for him to choose that path. 7 years ago, he had been relentlessly pursued by Cao Cao and had fled to Jingzhou, and now he could only continue to wander. Tens of thousands of people had fled with him, afraid of being slaughtered or captured by Cao Cao's army, and willing to follow Liu Bei, who was known for his benevolence and virtue. The addition of the common people slowed down the marching speed of the troops, only covering a distance of 12 miles a day. In such a difficult situation, Liu Bei made a stunning decision. He ordered Guan Yu to take the elite soldiers and leave by boat first, while he himself stayed behind to personally escort the people. His subordinates couldn't understand, and asked why he would refuse when Cao Cao's army arrived. Liu Bei uttered a phrase that has been passed down through the ages. In great undertakings, people are the most important. If the people are with me, how can I bear to abandon them? On the other side of the battlefield, Cao Cao was charging towards them, disregarding his 53 years of age, personally leading 5,000 cavalry for a relentless day and night pursuit, covering a distance of over 300 miles, all to catch up with Liu Bei. Many years ago, the two of them traveled together in the same carriage and sat at the same table. And even then Cao Cao recognized Liu Bei's exceptional qualities, saying, among all the heroes in the world, only the Lord and I are worthy. Now he was racing 300 miles, determined to leave only one hero in the world. Upon hearing that Cao Cao's army was approaching, Liu Bei left behind only Zhang Fei and 20 cavalry soldiers to hold the rear. From today's perspective, this was an extremely small force, almost insignificant. It was questionable whether they could even block or delay Cao Cao's army. But history often surpasses the imagination of present-day people. The records of the Three Kingdoms records this episode as follows. Zhang Fei stood his ground at the bridge. With an angry glare and a spear in hand, he declared, I am Zhang Yide. Come and face death with me. No enemy dared to approach. Thus they managed to escape. This historical account is so exaggerated, so thrilling, that later novelists have repeatedly preserved it, even embellishing and fabricating it, making this piece of history more believable. For example, in the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, it is mentioned that Zhang Fei had his cavalry raise clouds of dust, making Cao Cao suspect the presence of an ambush, and he shouted loudly, scaring Xiahou Jie to death, thus successfully stopping Cao Cao's army. However, in history, Zhang Fei did not do any of these things. He simply stood his ground at the bridge, glaring with his spear, causing the entire Cao Cao army to hesitate to approach. It was through this act that Zhang Fei received the highest praise among the generals in the historical records, even being hailed as the enemy of 10,000 men. In the Battle of Changbanpo, another prominent military leader was Zhao Yun. At that time, Liu Bei had abandoned his wife and children and fled, and Zhao Yun was nowhere to be seen. Someone informed Liu Bei that Zhao Yun had already surrendered to Cao Cao in the north. Enraged, Liu Bei threw a spear at that person, believing that Zhao Yun would never abandon him. As Liu Bei expected, Zhao Yun did not surrender. He found Liu Shan amidst the chaos and protected Lady Gan, rescuing both of them. Yes, this episode is not much different from Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Wu.According simply extensively expanded on the process of Zhao Yun rescue. I believe this is the fascinating aspect of history, even though those novels don't need to entirely fabricate events, as history itself is already sufficiently captivating. Liu Bei successfully eluded Cao Cao's army at Dangyang. But the crisis was far from over. Heading further south would lead into the territory of Dongwu. Liu Bei had little connection with Sun Quan, and considering he was being relentlessly pursued by Cao Cao, whether Sun Quan would be willing to accept him was still a question. It was at this critical moment that Lu Su appeared. different from his mediocre and honest portrayal in Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Historically, Lu Su was a top-level strategist, extremely resourceful, courageous, and decisive. This time, he went to Jingzhou as an envoy, claiming to offer condolences while secretly investigating the situation in Jingzhou, hoping to gain some advantage for Dongwu. However, he didn't expect Jingzhou to fall so quickly, and the opportunity for gaining an advantage was lost. The best he could do now was to secure an alliance. In a polite manner, he asked Liu Bei, "Where do you intend to go?" At this moment, Liu Bei still maintained some reserve, saying that he had some acquaintance with Wu Ju, the administrator of Cangwu, and he wanted to seek refuge with him. I highly doubt this statement, because Cangwu was located at the southernmost part of the Han Empire's territory. If Liu Bei were to go there, he would have no chance to establish himself in the Central Plains again. Therefore, it's likely that Liu Bei only said this to save face for himself, hesitant to directly express his intention of seeking refuge with Lu Su and the others. Lu Su understood this perfectly, and he said that Wu Ju was just an ordinary person, struggling to maintain his own position and unable to offer much assistance. On the other hand, my general Sun Quan is different. He is wise, benevolent, respects the talented, and treats his subordinates well. With skilled soldiers and abundant provisions, he is capable of achieving great things. Liu Bei was overjoyed upon hearing this and immediately dispatched Zhuge Liang as an envoy to Dongwu, hoping to form an alliance with Sun Quan to jointly resist Cao Cao. Zhuge Liang had his debut after coming out of seclusion. In Romance of the Three Kingdoms, this segment greatly praises Zhuge Liang, describing how he engaged in verbal battles with various scholars, eliminated the pro-surrender faction in Dongwu with great momentum, and used his wit to provoke Zhou Yu, turning him from an intended surrender to a staunch advocate of war. However, this portrayal is overly exaggerated. Zhuge Liang did play an important role, but it is not to the extent of single-handedly influencing everyone's decisions. Historically, he directly met with Sun Quan, and his words were straightforward. "We intend to contend with Cao Cao for the world. But Cao Cao is indeed formidable. We have been forced to retreat all the way here. Think carefully. If you believe you can defeat him, then fight. If not, surrender. Make your decision early." Zhuge Liang understood very well that if Sun Quan had truly intended to surrender, words would be futile. He wanted to test Sun Quan's attitude first, and Sun Quan had already made his decision before the meeting took place. Now let's rewind a bit in time. Sun Quan was still observing Cao Cao movements from across the river. Initially, he was unsure if Cao Cao would attack him. On the surface, it seemed that Cao Cao's target was Jingzhou and Liu Bei. But then a letter arrived from Cao Cao, shattering this illusion. "Those nearby will offer their apologies and subdue their guilt. Banners and flags are pointing southward. Liu Cong is powerless. Now, our naval forces of 800,000 troops are prepared to join forces with General Sun Quan in Wu." This letter displayed the aura of a conqueror, intimidating and alarming the ministers of Dongwu. The pro-surrender faction gained the upper hand, and everyone advised Sun Quan to welcome Cao Cao and let him take over Dongwu. Only Lu Su remained silent, and Sun Quan understood that Lu Su wanted to have a private conversation. He pretended to go to the restroom, and sure enough, Lu Su followed and said, "I just understood what they meant. Those people are all a threat to you. It's not worth conspiring with them for a grand cause. Look at me, Lu Su. I can surrender and still become a provincial official." "But what about you, General? What will be your fate if you surrender to Cao Cao?" Lu Su was giving Sun Quan a wake-up call. The Sun Quan family had been cultivating Jiangdong for 3 generations. They had a deep foundation, widespread reputation, loyal and dedicated retainers and guards. For Cao Cao, who was prone to suspicion and paranoia, they posed a significant threat. Why did Liu Bei leave Cao Cao in the first place? It was because Cao Cao couldn't tolerate him, and Liu Bei had to seek advantages and avoid harm. Incompetent Liu Cong and virtuous minister Lu Su, they could surrender to Cao Cao. But leaders like Sun Quan and Liu Bei would not have a favorable outcome after surrendering. Lu Su's words hit the mark of what Sun Quan had been thinking. He sighed and said, "The others have disappointed me. But you are the one who can clarify the grand plan. It's as if the heavens have bestowed you upon me." Lu Su then advised Sun Quan to quickly call back Zhou Yu. Unlike the narrow-minded Zhou Yu in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, who dared to go to war for a woman, the historical Zhou Yu was always a staunch advocate for war. He was not afraid of Cao Cao at all. His confidence stemmed from his exceptional military talent. After Zhou Yu returned, Dongwu held another meeting. During the meeting, everyone mentioned that Cao Cao held the emperor hostage and waged wars in all directions. Resisting him in the name of the court would not be smooth. now that Cao Cao had obtained Jingzhou, with thousands of warships and a large army advancing by land and water, we were outnumbered and couldn't easily contend with them. Now it was Zhou Yu's turn for verbal battles and debates. He immediately refuted, Cao Cao is called a Han minister, but he is actually a traitor. Our lord has inherited the legacy of his father and brothers, establishing dominance in Jiangdong. We occupy thousands of miles of land with well-trained troops and abundant provisions. It is our duty to dominate the world and eradicate the wickedness threatening the Han dynasty. Now Cao Cao is coming to us, willingly offering himself for destruction. Should we still go out to meet him? Zhou Yu then provided his analysis. He pointed out that the situation in the north was uncertain, with Ma Teng and Han Sui still in Guanxi. Cao Cao's hasty southern campaign would undoubtedly bring future troubles. His army was not skilled in naval warfare, and it was currently the height of winter with no forage for the horses. They would surely face difficulties and the spread of diseases when traversing mountains and rivers. All of these were major taboos in military strategy. In my opinion, we can capture Cao Cao alive today. I request the Lord to grant me 30,000 soldiers and horses, and I will definitely defeat Cao Cao's army. As Zhou Yu finished speaking, all eyes fell on Sun Quan. Now it was his turn to decide. It would be the most important decision of his life. Although Zhou Yu's analysis was logical, but Cao Cao had more victories than defeats, and it was an indisputable fact that he had a larger army and capable generals. What were the chances of winning in a real battle? Everyone had already given their judgments. Led by Zhang Zhao, the ministers of Dongwu advocated surrender, while on the other side, the advocates for war were only Zhou Yu and Lu Su. Sun Quan faced a difficult decision. Surrendering meant a life of humiliation and subservience, but not surrendering meant challenging Cao Cao, a dominant figure who conquered all directions. If he lost, his fate would likely be even worse. Sun Quan stood at the crossroads of history. At that time, Liu Bei was weak and unable to contend with Cao Cao. The fate of the world depended on Sun Quan's decision. If he surrendered, the era of the three kingdoms would cease to exist. Sun Quan was 26 years old that year. He was young, proud, and disliked kneeling. He shouted at Zhuge Liang, I have united all of Wu, leading 100,000 troops. How could I be manipulated by Cao Cao? He addressed the court officials. Cao Cao had long intended to overthrow the Han dynasty and establish himself as the ruler, but he only took into account Yuan Shao, Yuan Shu, Lu Bu, Liu Biao, and me. Now they are all dead, and only I am alive. I cannot coexist with Cao Cao. Then Sun Quan unsheathed his sword, patting the table in front of him. Anyone who supports Cao Cao, I will cut them down as well. This was the pinnacle moment of Sun Quan's life. He did not fear the northern overlord, but resolved to conquer the world with Jiangdong as his base. He embarked on a path that his father and brothers had once walked. A path of refusing to submit, leading to hegemony and royal power. With his determination set, Sun Quan ordered Zhou Yu and Cheng Pu to lead 10,000 troops to join forces with Liu Bei and resist Cao Cao. Both Zhuge Liang and Zhou Yu saw through the inherent weakness of the Cao Cao army. They believed that the soldiers from the north were not skilled in naval warfare, and the residents of Jingzhou, being held hostage by Cao Cao, would not fight to the death for him. Zhuge Liang also pointed out that the Cao Cao army had traveled a long distance in pursuit of Liu Bei. They had marched 300 li in one day and night and were already exhausted. As the saying goes, a strong crossbow at its end cannot pierce a skull. Under Liu Bei's command, there were still 20,000 soldiers. With the united efforts of Sun Quan and Liu Bei, they could definitely defeat Cao Cao. And once Cao Cao suffered defeat, he would surely retreat to the north. And at that time, Jingzhou would be easily within their grasp. Thus, the three kingdoms would stand in a tripartite confrontation. These words can be said to be quite insightful. With the support of the two geniuses, Zhuge Liang and Zhou Yu, the allied forces of Sun Quan and Liu Bei set their course for the Battle of Red Cliffs. Just as Zhou Yu expected, disease had already spread within Cao Cao's army. In their first battle, they were defeated by the allied forces, and Cao Cao's army had to retreat and station themselves north of the Yangtze River, facing off against the allied forces from across the river. Cao Cao dared not cross the river to launch a strong attack against the allies. Instead, he decided to take advantage of the numerical superiority of his army and engage in a protracted defensive battle. To overcome the weakness of his soldiers in naval warfare, Cao Cao ordered the ships to be connected together, significantly reducing the swaying of the boats, allowing the soldiers to walk on the connected ships as if on solid ground, and also utilizing the advantage of having a larger number of ships. Unlike in the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, where Pang Tong came up with the plan, in history, Cao Cao devised this strategy himself. However, this formation had a major flaw. If they were to be attacked with fire, with the ships connected, the fire could easily spread, and tens of thousands of soldiers would perish in a sea of flames. However, setting a large fire at Red Cliffs was not an easy task. First, you had to ignite the fire on the Cao Cao army's ships. And shooting fire arrows was the simplest method. But a single fire arrow has a small flame, and if you want to ignite so many ships on the water's surface, it would require a large number of archers continuously shooting arrows for a period of time. By the time you could shoot at the Cao Cao army, they could also shoot at you. And they had far more archers than you. To what extent did Cao Cao have archers? At that time, Sun Quan personally went on a large boat for reconnaissance. The boat was facing the side of the Cao Cao army, and it was riddled with arrows. There were so many arrows that were too heavy, causing the boat to almost capsize. Sun Quan was also a brilliant strategist. He had the boat rotate 180 degrees, so that the other side was also filled with arrows, and only then could he safely return. So using fire arrows to ignite the Cao Cao army was not reliable. You would be blown up before you could even get close, even if you managed to set Cao Cao's ships on fire. There was another factor to consider, the direction of the wind. The wind had a significant impact on the fire. It would burn in the direction the wind blew. At that time, it was winter, and the wind mostly blew from the northwest. It was very likely that you wouldn't be able to burn Cao Cao's ships and end up burning yourself instead. It was precisely due to these two reasons that Cao Cao felt confident in connecting his ships together. However, all of his carefully considered plans would be overturned by Zhou Yu and Huang Gai. Huang Gai came up with a brilliant idea, the feigned surrender. At that time, Cao Cao had become accustomed to receiving surrenders, and he would not be suspicious. Huang Gai could use this opportunity to safely approach the Cao Cao army, and all the hidden secrets would be within those surrendered ships. There were dozens of large warships, concealing bundles of straw and oil underneath the screens. Each ship was a massive incendiary bomb. Behind the large ships were small boats, reserved for Huang Gai and his soldiers to escape. As for the wind direction, in the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Zhuge Liang borrowed the east wind to solve this problem, but in reality, it was the work of nature. During winter, the wind along the Yangtze River doesn't necessarily blow from the northwest. Based on today's meteorological observations, the probability of having a southeast wind is 3%, and the probability of having an east or south wind is even higher, reaching 20%. The Sun-Liu coalition had the advantage of the elements. 1800 years ago, they launched the fire attack against the Cao Cao army on the opposite bank, in a winter with a strong southeast wind. When Huang Gai fleet approached the Cao Cao camp, the soldiers of Cao Cao army stretched their necks to look, pointing at the fleet and saying, "Look, Huang Gai is surrendering." They were completely unaware that they would soon be burned to death by the approaching ships. Suddenly, dozens of warships caught fire simultaneously, dealing a heavy blow to the connected Cao Cao naval fleet. The fire raged fiercely, consuming the northern plains. The flames spread all the way to the shore and the enemy's tents, causing countless casualties among the Cao Cao army, both burned and drowned. Those lucky enough to survive barely had time to catch their breath before they realized that Liu Bei and Zhou Yu elite forces had already arrived before them. Cao Cao was defeated and collapsed like a mountain. He could only hastily flee north along the Huarong road. On his escape, Cao Cao lamented, "Liu Bei and I, we are the same kind of people." The Battle of Red Cliffs confirmed Cao Cao's long-held impression of Liu Bei, that this man was as formidable as himself. Despite repeated defeats, he remained resolute, always seizing opportunities and rising above others. As for Sun Quan, Cao Cao's emotions toward him were more complex. Before the Battle of Red Cliffs, the 53-year-old Cao Cao never imagined that he would lose to the 26-year-old Sun Quan. He sincerely envied Sun Jian for having such a son, and sighed, "One should have a son like Sun Zhongmou, instead of Liu Jingsheng's son, who is no more than a dog or a pig." Behind this statement were admiration, envy, and regret. At the site where Cao Cao's spear was broken in the Battle of Red Cliffs, in his entire life, he was never able to break through the Yangtze River.